Welcome. Let me explain who I am. My name is John Pieper, and I founded the Bar Review back in 1975. I graduated from law school in 1970. I immediately went into the Army, and that's where I learned to teach. I was a lawyer. I taught constitutional law. I taught criminal law, and then I came out in 1972. I then started teaching Bar Review and started teaching at two law schools, New York Civil Practice, the CPLR, and I've been teaching ever since. You who have come here tonight will get to meet our entire faculty. My son Troy Pieper, my son DAMIAN Pieper, they lecture about a third of the lectures. The other 2/3, I lecture. So if you don't like me, or you don't like Troy and DAMIAN, we are in for some trouble. But I just thought I would tell you what you're going through. In the 40 years that I have been teaching, I have talked to thousands of foreign-trained lawyers. And foreign-trained lawyers will come up after class when everyone's left and said, "Professor, can I pass this bar exam?" And I said, "You certainly can." And you can. But I equate it to the Tour de France, the bike race that we have every couple of years. All your competitors have 20-speed titanium bikes, and you have a 1-speed bike. I'm simply saying that you are going to have to work a little bit harder than everyone else. But we have seen thousands of foreign-trained lawyers coming from civil code countries having to re-educate themselves in a very short period of time. And I will tell you, I've taken this bar exam, this multi-state bar exam, 33 times, all over the country. And I have to tell you, the first time I took that exam, I didn't do particularly well. I passed. It happened to be in the state of Florida. I am now in the top 1%, and I'd better be after taking it 33 times. But the point I'm trying to make is I do so well now because I have looked at thousands of multi-state questions. And that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to submerge yourself and expose yourself to as much American law that you possibly can. And with that, you'll win the marathon. You will pass the marathon. It will be one of the most joyous days of your life. Now, I'm going to turn you over to Troy. Troy is going to, is it Troy first? Yeah. Troy is going to talk to you about the structure of the exam, some of the deadlines on the exam, and then DAMIAN's going to come back and talk to you about some of the unique hurdles, obstacles that foreign-trained lawyers face and how you can overcome some of those obstacles. Troy.
Good evening, I'm Troy. I'm going to talk to you, as my father just mentioned, about some of the deadlines, first off, and things that you have to be aware of as you sort of head toward the bar exam. Then we'll ultimately, together, you and I, get to the bar exam, and I'll just go through some of the components and what you can expect and what you're going to be expected to know heading into that exam. So the first thing that I want to make very clear, right, those of you who are here seeking an LLM, right, we have some extra work to do and some very early work to do. The bar examiners are going to require that you fill out an evaluation for your foreign education, right? The bar examiners like to feel comfortable that the education that you received at home was equivalent to something that we would do here. And many of you, I'm sure, have already gone through this process. And the reason I tell you this first up is that the deadlines are very early, all right? If you want to take the July bar, you have to submit a form and all of your paperwork by October 1st. If you want to take the February bar, you have to submit all of that paperwork by May 1st. It is a lot of effort, all right? So for us as JDs, we're really just graduating. We're ultimately going to have to get everything together, and we wind up handing in, filling out an application and taking the exam. But before you can even file an application, you must submit and get an evaluation of your credentials. That can be relatively easy for folks who go to schools that send a whole bunch of students here, right? Where the law school is comfortable with the process here, where the bar examiners are comfortable with your law school back home, it goes relatively smoothly. But I've met a lot of foreign-trained lawyers who can't get in touch with their old school, can't find somebody who will send the documentation that's required, right? Then you've got to start thinking in advance. The next time I go home, I need to march right into an office over there at the old campus and make sure they produce what I need. You also will need to bring translated copies, right? If you have a degree that's in another language, a transcript in another language, letters that you receive in another language, bar examiners expect you to have those translated. That takes time, all right? So I just want to make sure everybody's got that on their radar. The best place to find out any information about this process, I mean, you can certainly ask me, but I'm not always there, right? The best place, and I think even the safest place, because the rules seem to change constantly, the bar examiner's website, nybarexam.org, nybarexam.org. That's where you're going to want to go. When you go there, on the left-hand side, you'll see a little drop-down box. There are multiple things you can select. One is foreign trained attorney, right? Another is exam eligibility. You probably want to familiarize yourself with those things. Many of you have probably done this already because you wanted to make sure it was going to work when you came here to get your LLM, right? But I always am concerned that some people just kind of come and aren't sure they want to take the bar and now either like it here or realize, you know, that's not a bad idea. If I'm here anyway, I might as well be admitted in New York, right? So when you make that decision, first place you go, NewYorkBarExam.org, and make sure that you're starting the process of getting your evaluations together. The bar examiners now are currently telling us that it could take up to 6 months for them to evaluate your credentials. All right, so realize if you get it in by October 1st, it's going to be, you know, sometime out into April probably before we hear. So you want to make sure when April comes along, you get the information and now you're ready to apply. All right. In New York, we have the bar exam is given twice a year. The application periods, all right, they open up for the month of April and the month of November. So if you intend now, after you've gotten your credentials, and you don't want to do it before, let them evaluate your credentials for free, right? If you apply and they tell you, you're not qualified, we don't accept your credentials, they won't give you your money back. All right. So generally, you want to get that notice that says I'm eligible to sit for the bar, and you should get that before April or before November, depending on the exam you plan to take. If you plan to take the July exam, the period for everyone, this would include JDs, so your law school should be on top of you, right, reminding you of this. But if you're not from New York, it might be different too. So make sure if you get, you know, you're starting to come up on the exam. The month of April is where New York opens up their application, right, for you to submit online to take the July bar. When we're talking about the February bar, it's the month of November. And when I say that, that means November 1st, the online application is available, right? By the time we get to December 1st, it's gone, all right? So you have a window of the month, all right, to get it in. Now, what happens when we apply, right? Application, they're going to ask you a lot of the basic details. It'll be the same thing for JDs as it is for LLMs. Just, you know, where you live, what law schools you went to, you know, what your addresses are so they can communicate with you. They'll ask you some basic things about, you know, basically your history, but it's not a terribly involved application process. You'll submit your application, pay your fees, and then you'll study for the bar, right? Which we know will come in July and in August. In July and in February. Now, the other deadlines that I want you to be aware of, all right? We know first we have to get our education sort of stamped, right? That we've done what the bar examiners want. We also then need to apply for the bar. There are some other things that you probably know are floating around out there. One is we all must take the MPRE, right? The Multistate Professional Responsibility Exam, right? You can take that at any time that you like. All right, so there is an exam given every November, every March, and every August. You want to get that on your radar as well, because that one's not such a biggie. All right, if you've talked to JDs, you've talked to LLMs maybe before you, some people, they take it the first time, they don't do so well, they take it again. You can take it as many times as you want. You want to get it over with. But what you don't want to have happen is you pass the bar, you're ready to go, and then you have to go home for something, you can't come back right away, and time starts to lag. You must get that done within 3 years of your passing the bar in order for it to qualify. Otherwise, you can't be admitted. So what most JDs do and what you should start to think about doing is take the MPRE now. If you are taking a professional responsibility course, take it when you're doing that, because you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Study for one and help yourself in the other. All right, it's a 60 multiple choice question test. It's on ethics and professional responsibility, how lawyers should conduct themselves. We all must do it. You want to start doing it now. Usually about 6 weeks before the exam, they open up the application timetable, right? So I believe for August, you want to be doing that sometime in early July, late June, getting yourself just registered to take that exam. All right, so The MPRE is a good thing to have on your radar. Keep in mind, you need not take it in New York. You can take it as soon as you'd like, or you could take it after the bar, right? But if you know you're going to be in California during one of those periods, take it in California. You simply tell the bar examiners in California to send your score to New York. The reason you can do that, the National Conference of Bar Examiners hosts the MPRE, right? And New York just uses it as a component. So you may take it in Hawaii, you could take it in the Virgin Islands, you could take it in Guam if you like, all right? Anywhere where they have a location, New York will accept it. You just need to get it done, all right? The other things that you want to have on your radar in terms of timing are things like the pro bono requirement, right? You may have heard a little bit about this 50-hour pro bono requirement. The court has recently stated that people who have LLM degrees can utilize pro bono work, volunteer work that they did in their home countries for the last year heading into your LLM program. What you probably want to do, if you have some things that you think could qualify, right, so that you don't have to do all of this work before you get admitted, now would be a good time to go back and get letters, right, get certifications that say, I did this work and I was supervised if you needed to be supervised if you weren't admitted, right? That's a good thing to start doing now, because you know a year from now how hard it is to get somebody to write you a recommendation or to remember who you were in that agency. Want to get that done now, right? And then finally, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the exam, remember also in terms of your time frame, if you take the exam in July, it generally takes about 3 months to get your results. All right, so if you take the July exam, you're probably going to hear in early November. When you take the bar in February, you generally hear in early May. All right, so again, that might be on your radar in terms of when you might want to take and get some of these, like things like the MPRE, done once and for all, so that when the time comes, you hit the ground running. Right, you want to be ready to file for admission, because once you pass the bar and once you take the MPRE and once you get that congratulatory letter, there's still more work to be done. Right, here in New York, we have to take some classes that kind of explain to you the profession a little bit. They help you with some professional responsibility things, give some advice. There's also a meeting that you must have, an individual interview with a member of the conduct committee. And then finally, you have a swearing-in ceremony, and you must go to the appellate division and actually sign the book that says you are a member of the bar. If you plan not to be here, right, after graduation, you plan to go home, you're going to need to come back for those things. So you want to start again thinking ahead how you're going to coordinate a visit that maybe gets all of these things done in one shot. If you're going to be here, you'll be like me. You'll submit it, you'll wait for the call, you'll do one at a time whenever it comes along, you'll invite your family and you'll go to the ceremony, all right? And it takes a little bit of time. But if you're traveling thousands of miles to be here, you want to get your ducks in a row and make sure that you're doing it at the right time and all at once. The bar examiners will work with you on that, all right? So both the bar examiners, and I think too, for those of you who are currently in your LLM programs, you've always got someone who's in charge of the international students. Those people tend to know all the ins and outs because people have done this before, right? And they just did it, right? Like sometimes you meet people and they say, oh yeah, this is how you do it. Well, that's 5 years ago. It's very different now. People in the law schools tend to be on top of this. Make friends with those people, right? They will help you, right? They will send you emails, and pay attention to those emails, right? Making sure we don't miss anything and that you've got all of the advantages that you could possibly have. Okay, now let's fast forward to the exam, all right? When you go to take the exam, right, remember that the bar exam in New York is a 2-day exam, all right? It is always given on the last Tuesday and Wednesday of February and July, all right? Last Tuesday and Wednesday of February and the last Tuesday and Wednesday of July. The exam consists of 12 hours and 15 minutes of testing across the two days, all right? And now I'll kind of walk you through what to expect in those 2 days. One thing that might be helpful here is if you take a look at the pamphlet that we gave you. If you look on the back side, all right, it breaks down the 2 days of the exam, and that might just save us some time to streamline through, all right? Here what you'll see is that the very first day of the exam, as I mentioned, is a Tuesday, all right? The Tuesday portion of the exam is what we call the New York Day. And the reason we call it the New York Day is that this is the opportunity that the New York bar examiners have to test you on New York law, all right? You'll come in the morning, and it's a madhouse, right? If you have never taken an exam with 12,000 other people, you don't know what this experience is like, all right? You will get there, and we have on the sheet here that it starts at 9. They will tell you to be there at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. It's a lot like going to the airport. All of the crazy people, right, very nervous and in a hurry, are trying to get into that test center. There's security, no cell phones, right, no big luggage, no books, no things, just everybody in, right? It's like a cattle herd. Once you get into the test center, you'll sit there for a half an hour once they begin, just filling out who you are, where you come from, identification things that they know you're who you claim to be, showing your ID and that everything matches up. There are fingerprints involved, a lot of things that you have to deal with when you get there. When they finally sound the gun and it's time to begin, all right, you will first be faced with 50 multiple choice questions, right? And I know many of you don't like multiple choice questions. It's new to you. The JDs, we couldn't go to kindergarten without filling out a couple of bubbles and taking a multiple choice test. We're very used to it, right? Not that we're all great at it, but we've really been exposed to it. And I know many LLMs have not been. So the first thing you face, 50 multiple choice questions. You must complete those 50 multiple choice questions in an hour and 15 minutes, all right? Now, what do they ask? Well, if you take a look at the pamphlet in the back side, the little paragraph that's at the bottom of day 1, it lists the what is fair game for the New York bar examiners to ask you. It lists the subject matters that New York tests on. You can get a little bit more detail from those from the website. They have a content outline. It's about 25 pages long, and it breaks those out a bit. A great thing to take a look at very early on so you have an idea. It's just called the content outline. It's right on the home page of the New York bar examiner's website. But if you look at that list, and depending on how you read it, it's about 24 subjects, right? 50 questions across 24 treatises, right? Little minute points of law that they're going to test you on, and you have to know, all right? So it could be, as we have here, family law, wills, New York and federal constitutional law, right? It can be corporations. It could be UCC Articles 2, 3, or 9. Many of you probably don't even know what those are, right? Any bit of detail that they want to pull out, 50 multiple choice questions, hour and 15 minutes. When you're done with those, you'll instantly turn over to 3 essays. The bar examiners will ask you 3 essays, again, in New York law, and ask you to write pretty comprehensive responses to those essays. All right, those essays each take 40 minutes, all right, so that takes us the remaining 2 hours of the morning session, all right. Now, just to give you a sense of how much everything is worth, the 50 multiple choice questions are worth 10%. Each essay is worth 8%. So when you break for lunch, we're already in to the tune of 24%. Oh, I did that wrong, 34%, sorry. My math is always my weakness, all right? That's why I'm a lawyer, right? Now, so 34%. Then you break for lunch, and it looks there, oh, an hour and a half for lunch. Oh, no, right? They come along, they want to take your papers, sign you out, all right? It takes some time. Then, like the airport, everyone funnels out. And pretty soon thereafter, everyone has to come back in. Security again. It's not such a pleasant break, all right? It is a madhouse with all of those people. All right, so you'll come back, all right, they'll again make you fill things out to identify who you are, takes about a half an hour, and then we begin. What happens in the second half? 2 more essays, all right, pretty much similar to what you had in the morning, but another 2. This time, though, they give us 45 minutes instead of 40 minutes for the essays, right? They can be a little bit more involved, maybe have an extra issue, all right, but that's what we do for the next hour and a half, 2 45-minute essays. Just quickly before we go to the last component, I'll give you a little bit more detail on the essays. The essays can be in any of those 24 subjects, but they tend to be driven by a theme, all right? Most themes that we get are as follows. You get a contract essay with some corporations or partnership or something like that, usually a business that had some dealings, some contractual dealings. You also get a criminal law question, usually with some criminal procedure in it. Not always, but sometimes. The third kind of category or theme is usually a family law real property essay. Then you also have a torts essay, right, where somebody gets injured and they sue. We want to know who's responsible, things like that. And then finally, a wills essay. It could be wills, it could be trusts, but almost always a wills and trusts essay. So those are kind of your 5 essays. There used to be a very traditional and perfectly followed order of things. Not so much anymore. Now they mix it up a little bit, so it's not really worth it to worry about the order. That said, what you also want to keep in mind is that New York doesn't just ask a family law question or a real property question or a contracts question. There are always some of these other 20 subjects, 24 subjects, peppered into all the essays. All right? So just to give you an example, a criminal law question might have an evidence question, it might have a UCC Article 3 question, and it might have a procedure question as well as a criminal law question in the one big essay. So you have to not so much put on your blinders and go toward one subject. Multiple subjects will be drawn out in each of the 5 essays. Now, we said in the afternoon, 2 essays took us an hour and a half, right? Those essays, again, are worth 8% of your score, so another 16% towards your written portion. What happens with the last hour and a half of Tuesday is what we call the Multistate Performance Test, the MPT. In this part of the exam, the bar examiners are, instead of just going to test you on law and ask you to give them a dissertation on this fact pattern, they're now going to ask you to produce a written product that they would expect a first year, a newly admitted attorney to be able to produce. That might be a letter, it might be a brief, it might be a memorandum of law, it might be a trial memo, right? Very different things, but things that they think you can handle. They give you, instead of the essays, a separate packet, and this packet will be somewhere between 20 and 25 pages long, and it will have 2 components. There'll be a factual file, and there'll be a legal library. They will require you in an hour and a half to read the entire thing, digest it all, think it through, and then produce this letter, this brief, this memorandum. I find this is the toughest thing for the LLM student, right? Because especially when English is not your first language, it becomes that much harder to get through 25 pages in an hour and a half. And you're not getting through it in an hour and a half, you really have to get through it in 45 minutes. And now you have to write like mad, right, for the next 45 minutes, and it's just an extra struggle, all right? These are things Damian will speak to you about that you can start to take a look at so that they don't come as a big shock when the time comes. And you want to work on your approach so that you can kind of get through it as quickly as possible. But that's called the Multistate Performance Test. It comes at the end of the day, so you're also tired and maybe already falling a little bit behind, and it is a bear, all right? Very difficult component of the exam just for that reason. If you had all day to do it, not so bad. Now, that brings us to the conclusion of the first day. Remember, for the first day then, we've gone through 60% of the exam. The New York day is more heavily weighted than the multi-state day, which is coming on Wednesday, all right? So, what do? You'll funnel out through the airport, as we said, right? And you'll go out with all the people in the street who want to talk about the exam. You will race home, all right? Race to a hotel and hide until tomorrow morning. And we come back and we do it again, all right? We funnel in, we sit down. What do we face? All right, in the morning, you will face 100 multiple choice questions, and you will have 3 hours to answer them. That is 1 minute and 48 seconds per question. It's not a lot of time. The fact patterns tend to be relatively long. You have 4 choices to pick from, right? That's sometimes a comfort, but wait until you see them, all right? Tough questions. If you've taken the MPRE, or when you do, you'll know what I mean. All right, they are very maddeningly drafted, and the choices are very hard to differentiate between. So when you pick them up for the first time, do 10 and call me and tell me that it only took you the amount of time it's supposed to take you, right? It's going to be difficult, and it's something you're going to want to practice, and then you're ultimately going to work on the speed. The nice thing about Wednesday, though, they only test in 6 subjects. They're listed here on the back of the pamphlet, but they're easy to remember. Right? It's constitutional law, contracts, criminal law, evidence, real property, and torts. Now, that doesn't sound so bad after yesterday. We had all of those plus another 18 or so. But remember, those are giant subjects. So within real property, it's mortgages, it's future interests, it's concurrent estates, it's deeds, it's recording statutes. It's a lot of material. All right, so don't get too comforted by that, but at least it's a little bit more together. What you'll want to do too, if you decide to take a look at some of this in advance, another great website, right? This is the National Conference's website, ncbex.org. National Conference BEX barexaminers.org. ncbex.org. There, you can find some of these questions to take a look at. You can also find the MPTs there if you would like to practice some. They're great. But what you can also find is a little bit more detail about the 6 subjects and what's fair game and what's to be expected to potentially be tested on, right? Like we talked about the content outline, they have a little one or 2 page outline for each of the subjects. Not a lot of detail. What it'll more do is scare you, because you'll say, oh my Lord, all of that is included in there, right? And you'll be amazed. So, 100 questions in the morning, spread across those 6 subjects, right? We said most people, I will bet you now, most people in this room and most people in the country have trouble finishing, right? So if you think you're a little bit slower, a little bit behind in the test taking, it's going to get worse here, right? Because even the JDs who you think may have all the advantages, they're going to have trouble finishing too. You'll get through the 100, you go to lunch, same drill, come back, another 100 in the afternoon, right? In the afternoon, you go through those 100, basically the same as before, right? And you finish at the end of the day after another 6 hours of testing with your completed bar exam, all right? You will leave then, right, exhausted again. Everyone will want to chat with you. You'll run, right? If you're like me, you'll get away from everybody, and then you wait, right? Remember, 3 months to get your results, right? We have some folks here today waiting for their results. You wait, right? And you don't know, right? So, as we said, that's at least a little bit of an overview of what to expect and the timelines, right? And I hope that that's helpful, right? But try to go and take a look at those websites, get a little bit more information about the exam itself as you get closer. But at least you have a little bit of an overview here as to what to expect and what is going to be expected. And Damian is going to talk to you now just about some things that you can do and some obstacles that you might face and some things you may or may not have already started to think about, and hopefully give you some good advice. Thank you.
So I get to be more or less the bearer of bad news, but I don't think it's necessarily such tremendously bad news. I just want to impart some information so that you recognize what's ahead of you. If you have an appreciation for that, I think you can start to plan and lay things out so that you can succeed on the exam. And that's everyone's goal, is to get through this thing on the first try. So a couple of unique challenges that you'll face as LLMs in particular. First off is the breadth of the subject matter that you're going to be responsible for. As Troy pointed out on the New York portion of the exam, you have over 20 subjects. And for the JDs, they haven't learned all of those subjects. You have probably learned even fewer. So it's a lot to get under your belt. It's a lot of things that are going to be brand new to you, and it's going to mean that you spend a lot more time studying and learning on your own. You won't have an entire semester to learn information. Instead, you're going to be forced to learn it for the first time. The second, especially frustrating thing, is that you will be responsible for 2 different types of law. There will be distinctions between the law you need to know for the MBE portion of the exam on Wednesday and the New York law that you need to know on Tuesday for the New York portion of the exam. So just to give you an example of how that works, you're probably familiar with the concept that there is a right to counsel in the United States. Easy enough, right? Well, you'll need to know things a little bit more complicated than that. You'll have to know what the sources of that right to counsel are. You've got your Fifth Amendment right to counsel, and you've also got a Sixth Amendment right to counsel. I can see someone nodding their head, a little bit of recollection from the summer. Within that, you'll learn the rules and you'll say, okay, I've got it straight. The Fifth Amendment right to counsel is going to attach as soon as I'm subject to custodial interrogation. I'm in custody and the government is questioning me. I have a right to have an attorney there. But there's also a Sixth Amendment right to counsel, which attaches on the commencement of formal judicial proceedings, essentially when the state is now turning against you as an individual. The Constitution says, okay, at this point you have a right to counsel. Easy enough. Anybody in this room can learn that. But it's going to be very frustrating when you start to recognize that with that Sixth Amendment right to counsel, the commencement of formal judicial proceedings on the MBE portion of the exam is typically going to be at your arraignment, right? Where you're in front of the judge and the charges are read out to you. In New York, they say, well, we think it's upon the filing of an accusatory instrument, which would include a warrant. So it could start much earlier. And when you're doing an MBE question, you're going to say, oh my gosh, there was a warrant here. Has the right to counsel attached? Has it not? In New York, it would have attached. On the MBE portion of the exam, no right to counsel yet. You haven't been arraigned. So it's a lot of detail that's going to be brand new to you. You haven't taken criminal procedure yet, but now you also have to keep two different sets of laws straight. It's very, very tough. So it's a challenge for the JDs, but it's something that I think is amplified for anyone who's in LLM. The third challenge that you're going to have is timing, right? That you will learn all of this material and you'll get it under your belt, you'll start to feel comfortable, and then what happens? You don't know it quite well enough to communicate it back in an essay, right? Or you don't know it quite well enough to finish 100 multiple choice questions in 3 hours. What that means is that you're going to have to dramatically increase your proficiency so that you can get all of the questions done and score enough points to actually pass the exam. It's a much harder challenge, and tied in directly to that, I think, is the idea of language. For many folks who are in LLM programs now, English is not their first language, and even if you're fluent in English, when you have the pressure of a timed exam, you may read a question and you may pause on a word that you know the definition to, but it's not there for you in the moment on the test. Or you're writing an essay and you can think of the word in French or Mandarin or German, but you're not prepared to put it down in English. What does that mean? It's a unique challenge that you're going to face. It simply means that you're going to have to be that much more careful in terms of your preparation. And I think you also want to be realistic as you are practicing so that you get an understanding when you've done enough practice essays, when you know the material well enough, of what is possible for you within the allotted time frame. You should know walking into the exam, having done practice essays, that you're not going to be able to write 7-page essays in 40 minutes. You're probably going to limit yourself to somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 to 3 pages. You'll know what the maximum you can write is in terms of each issue on the exam, and you're going to have to stick to that. You're going to have to limit your responses in order to complete the entire exam. And that's a real challenge. But I think there are things that you can do at this point to put yourself in a better position to pass. And it all boils down to learning substantive U.S. law and developing the skills that they test on the exam. And the first thing that you can do in your LLM programs in terms of learning substantive law is pick particular courses that are going to show up on the exam. An easy place to start are the 6 multistate subjects, some of which you'll have some familiarity with and some of which will be brand new. Things like U.S. constitutional law. Unless you took something like that in your home country in an international context, it's going to be brand new. Not a bad idea to learn that now. The remaining subjects, again, they're on your handout, but contracts, real property, evidence, torts, con law, like I said, and crim, did I say? Yeah, crim and torts. I'm used to them, but I think you want to make sure that you're familiar with those subjects, at least some of them, before you walk into bar review, right? Before you sit down and attempt to cover all of the material, get as much familiarity with the material so that bar review is in fact review and not a first-time exposure. Along those lines, as you start to get comfortable with the substantive law, start developing your skills. So if you've taken a course this semester in contracts, look at some MBE questions, either on the National Conference of Bar Examiners website or through materials that you could buy at Barnes & Noble. You could buy them on Amazon. You can register early for a bar review course. You'll have materials you can work with, and you can start to practice. You'll know much of the information that is going to be essential, and then through practice, you'll start to get more comfortable with the details you're going to need to know for the exam. And similarly, you can start writing essays, right? Start preparing yourself to give back the information under time conditions. Because for many of you, this is a new experience, doing multiple choice questions and not writing essays, but writing essays in an IRAC format. So many people I hear from them, they say, I hear about IRAC in my law school classes, and no one ever teaches us about IRAC. Well, you want to get comfortable with that. It's just a simple formula, and you can look at prior bar exam answers to get an idea of what it is, but it's a simple statement of what the issue is, it's an explanation of the relevant rules of law, and then an application of the facts that you've been given to the rules that you've provided to reach a reasoned conclusion. It's very formulaic, and you want to, as you start to get more and more comfortable with the substantive law, be in a position that you know you could answer any question with, perhaps 4 or 5 sentences of law, apply the facts and reach a conclusion and move on. You may know more, but you're going to limit yourself, I think, being conscious of the time. So I think those are 2 of the big keys that you want to do. Learn blocks of substantive law and then start practicing on your own. Another great way, it's something that people reached out to us last year who were LLM students who had passed the exam, and they said, we think one of the best things that could have helped us would have been to start bar review early. It's not a bad idea to consider that, and that's something that we're doing this year as part of our LLM Passport program, is giving people access to our lecture videos from the previous course. I would never expect anyone who's doing an LLM program to be able to complete an entire bar review course on top of their studies, but you could take an individual subject, evidence for example, and for the next 3 weekends you could sit yourself down in the library, learn all of evidence. You're not going to be an expert in it, but now you know the basics and you know enough that you could sit down and start to do some MBE questions. You could look at some evidence issues from prior bar essays and say, could I explain hearsay in 5 sentences? Could I explain privileges in 5 sentences? It's not so easy, but I think through going through that process, you're going to start to shrink that universe of subjects that you have no familiarity with. And for you, it will then become bar review as opposed to a real first-time learning experience. You'll have a leg up on a lot of your classmates who have no exposure to a greater number of subjects on the exam. So that's what you really want to do, is try to apply yourself and find the discipline and energy to expose yourself to as much of the information as you can and developing the skills. The 2 have to go hand in hand, because you couldn't sit down today and do 100 multiple choice questions and expect to get any right other than through the process of guessing. If you don't know the material, it's going to be hard to learn. But if you can learn a subset of the material, particular subjects, you can then start to make some progress in given areas, and it's going to be that much easier for you when you start to prepare for the exam. So I encourage everyone to find as much time as they can. There are a lot of fun things that you're going to be doing over the next year in addition to your studies, but if you can find free time instead of maybe doing something that you enjoy, find some time in the library and get ahead. The more you can do, the easier your experience next summer is going to be preparing for the exam. So thanks very much, and I wish you all luck.